Most of the Western world has pretty simple laws about how to punish criminals. Most people who break the law only get a fine or a certain amount of time in jail, depending on how bad their crime was. But these haven't always been simple facts. There have been many cruel and, more importantly, often very strange sentences and court cases in history. We'll cover 10 of them right now.
Drunkard's cloak. The peculiar drunkard's cloak, which was also referred to as the Newcastle cloak in the northern region of England, was a form of punishment that was administered to serial offenders who were alcoholics and who appeared to be incapable of behaving after drinking. The peculiar concept was not overly complicated. Take a large, heavy wooden barrel that is generally used for storing alcoholic beverages, cut the holes that are necessary for the head and limbs to fit through it, and then force the offender to wear it for a lengthy amount of time while marching through the streets of the neighborhood, which will most likely result in public humiliation. People in the town would behave in an antagonistic manner and make fun of people who wore these barrel shirts, treating it as if it was some kind of community gathering. To add insult to injury, the heavy garment may have imposed a significant amount of physical stress on the bodies of the people who wore it, which may have resulted in more than 4 injuries. Regardless of the circumstances, it may have been an effective deterrence at the very least. Shame masks. The penalty of wearing a mask that is designed to make the person wearing it look stupid is a very humorous idea, and as such, it was employed for crimes that were also considered to be relatively minor. The masks were crafted from cold metal and featured motifs that were either animalistic or simply weird. Many of these items of headwear are currently on exhibit in museums across the world. Shame masks were widely employed as a kind of punishment for women. They were also known as a scold's bridle due to the fact that they were frequently used to punish what was thought to be the social crime of gossiping among local women members of the community. Additional causes for the punishment included dishonesty, eavesdropping, and gluttony, all of which would result in time spent wearing these masks, which were intended to serve as a humiliating deterrent. Those who were penalized for lying, for example, would receive masks with longer noses. It is interesting to note that the patterns would vary based on the infraction. To ensure that as many people as possible were able to watch the peculiar exhibition, the individuals who wore these were occasionally dragged around in chains while a crowd was called out with a bell.
Trees. As a word of caution to people watching who are sensitive to the subject matter, this specific manner of punishment was exceptionally cruel, despite the fact that the title may give the impression that it is benign. Without a doubt, theft is a crime that many people look down upon, but it is not a crime that most people would consider necessitating one of the most cruel and bizarrely innovative types of punishment in the history of the world. The ancient Persian Empire devised a method of killing thieves that involved the use of 2 trees, and it was widely implemented throughout that time. Ropes were used to secure the trees in their position after they were bent back in an unreasonable manner. Once that was done, the poor felon was bound to them. Both of his limbs, his left and right, were positioned to one side of his body. After then, the ropes that were holding the trees in place were severed, and the thief, who had most likely come to deeply regret his actions at this point, was torn apart by force as the trees returned to their upright position. However, if nothing else, at least it was said to be quite speedy. Ancient Egyptian nose cutting. The face is the most expressive and distinctive part of the body, and it is the first thing that comes to our attention when we meet someone for the first time. That it would be the subject of inventive punishment is therefore not something that should come as a surprise. At the very least, during the time that they devised their punishment of nose amputation, ancient Egyptians clearly believed that it made total sense. The strange and cruel deed would keep the victim alive, but it would not improve their quality of life. It was also considered to be extremely detrimental to the victim's personality and their ability to express themselves. As a consequence of this, the sufferers were less social and lost their position in society. As a result, they even sought out the initially available forms of plastic surgery. On the other hand, such tactics were mainly ineffective, which is why the penalty, unfortunately, continued to be implemented. Although the Egyptians were the ones who used this punishment, it was also used by other people as a penalty for adultery. In addition to being identified in Hindu and pre-Columbian American civilizations, historical documents demonstrate that it was utilized by the Greek, Roman, and Byzantine empires. Cooked in a metal bull. The brazen bull, which is an ancient Greek invention, is regarded by some to be the most heinous form of punishment and method of torture in the history of the world. It is quite possibly the most awful item on our list. The victim would be placed into a bronze sculpture of a bull with hollow insides that was intricately constructed. The sculpture would then be heated up, which would cause the person who was kept internal, the bull's stomach, to become cooked. Apparently, in order to make it even more terrible, the bull had very specially constructed acoustics that would make the poor criminal's screams of agony sound very much like the sound of a real bull. This was done in order to make the situation even more terrifying. According to reports, the person who developed the gadget eventually became a victim of the approach as well. This method was normally reserved for the most serious instances of criminal activity and was intended to be employed in part to discourage individuals from committing crimes in the first place. Nudity. The next topic of discussion is a form of punishment that has been the subject of some contemporary debate as a result of its application in the HBO series Game of Thrones. It was an idea that many people felt to be ridiculous, unrealistic, and just there to cater to people who were looking for specific mature themes. The show featured characters who were punished by a naked walk of atonement in public. It is true that this scene has a historical basis, despite the fact that something is genuine does not necessarily mean that it is a good fit for a story, just as the fact that something is fake does not necessarily mean that it is not a good fit for a story. People who committed adultery in medieval France were subjected to public scrutiny, humiliation, and a damaged reputation. They were also required to embark on a nude walk of shame. In spite of the fact that the deed appeared to be directed primarily toward the ladies, the men with whom they had affairs were also present and were subjected to the same peculiar penalty. Blood eagle. The term blood eagle refers to an ancient Viking punishment that is both intriguing and controversial. It is a method of punishment that is so graphic and peculiar that historians debate it may not have even been real. To describe it in a straightforward manner that is yet horrifying, the process consisted of keeping the victim alive while their back was ripped open, their ribs were fractured, and their organs were organized in such a way that they resembled gory skeletal wings springing out of a person's back. Although there are historical accounts of the process, many historians consider it to be so horrible, harsh, and difficult to carry out that its very existence is still the subject of much discussion to this day. It is undeniable that this makes for a terrifyingly effective story, and it may even be a reflection of the society that was prevalent during that era, regardless of whether or not it was actual. Tattoos. Due to the fact that Japan is usually included on lists that discuss distinctive cultural traditions, it was inevitable that it would also be included in this particular list. Thankfully, the cause is one of the ones that is the least terrible among those that we are talking about today. In today's world, getting a tattoo appears to be a choice that is both personal and aesthetic. During the Edo period in Japan, however, it was a method of marking offenders in order to ensure that even if they were reintegrated into society, people had a general idea of who they were dealing with. This prevented them from having the ability to find work, maintain a good standing in society, or begin a new life with a clean slate. Murderers would receive very prominent markings on their heads, whereas thieves would walk away with a simple arm tattoo. The tattoos that would result will vary depending on the severity of the crime and the type of crime that was committed. As a result of this punishment, as well as more contemporary connections to Yakuza, tattoos continue to be discriminated against in Japan, which is the most likely basis for this stigma.
Crushed by rocks. Those individuals who stayed silent after committing a felony or who refused to confess or engage with the legal system at the time, were reportedly to be crushed to death by rocks. This practice is also known as peine forte et dure, which is French for strong and hard punishment. The individuals who were to be punished were to be placed on the ground and stacked with an ever-increasing quantity of large stone weights, which would eventually lead to their destruction in a manner that was both slow and agonizing. Giles Corey, an 80-year-old man who did not make a plea and actually stood trial during the famed Salem witch trials, silently accepted his execution for suspected witchcraft. This is a well-known and horrifying example of this phenomenon. Giles Corey did not want to forfeit the things that belonged to his family.
Pig execution. Defeating the law is a very human notion. On the other hand, the concept of an animal being put on trial and then being punished by the law is something that the majority of people would anticipate seeing in a cartoon rather than in real life. If we were to apply that understanding to historical events, it would appear that it is utterly and completely incorrect. In the past, the process of euthanizing animals that were deemed to be a threat to human beings was frequently very different from what it is today. There have been dozens of official judicial trials that have taken place all over Europe, particularly during the 14th and 16th centuries, and the outcomes of these trials have resulted in highly human punishments for animals that were normally considered to be livestock. The execution of a female pig for the heinous act of killing a young child is a case that has gained a lot of notoriety, and it certainly has the potential to become infamous. On the other hand, the fact that the sow's children were acquitted on the accusation of being accomplices, primarily due to the fact that they were too young, is one of the details that makes this case more weird than it is sad. Another pig from the 14th century was judged guilty of the heinous crime of killing a baby while it was still in its cradle. The fact that the pig was made up as if it were human, wearing a waistcoat and trousers that were authentic to the time period, and then carried to the gallows to be hung, is a peculiar detail that fits very well with the overall theme of the investigation.